Well, I don't just believe one thing. See, I believe lots of different things. I have lots of different hypotheses, and some of them even conflict with each other, and I'm aware of that. But I'm not complacent with it. I'm always trying to resolve the things I believe and figure out what's right and what's not. But there's no way any one person can have it all figured out. So I don't think it's reasonable for a person to say they believe just one thing about any particular topic. I think of beliefs more as a probability distribution. Maybe I 80% believe this and I 10% believe that, and there's 10% left for I don't know what. And I think that's in many ways more honest to acknowledge that there are multiple possibilities, and I don't have 100% of my weight thrown behind just one belief. In fact, I think when people do put all of their weight on just one belief, not only does that misrepresent the evidence that they have, because it's very hard to achieve enough evidence to be that certain about anything, I think it also expresses a certain degree of dogmatism. The main way people get to 100% certainty about any one belief is by simply snapping to the nearest extreme. And that shows that they lack the humility to acknowledge that they don't know everything. I don't know everything, so yeah, I partially believe and I partially don't believe. And of course, one is a lot stronger than the other. I mostly think that naturalism has the best explanations for the way the universe is. But that doesn't mean that I only believe that. I try to keep possibilities open for everything. Now, it's said that when an honest man discovers that he's wrong, he either ceases to be wrong or he ceases to be honest. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. It's important when you encounter something it's not okay to just close your eyes, plug your ears, and ignore something. With truth comes responsibility. There is a moral imperative when you know something is true to stand up for it and defend it. I don't think it's okay to just respect everybody's beliefs and just be super passive, because when people are wrong, they teach their children to be wrong, and those children teach their children, and it grows. And by remaining silent, you become inherently responsible for some of the growth of mistruths and the growth of the pain that emanates from these mistruths if you don't do something about it. But it's a delicate balance it's a delicate line to walk. You have to figure out when it's appropriate to respect other people's beliefs and when you should open your mouth and say something. And I don't know if I do that right, but I do try. I try to make sure my beliefs are aligned with what I really know, and I try to learn as much as I possibly can because I want to know more and I want my beliefs to converge to what is true. And I like to think that I've been doing it for a while, and the harder I've tried to be flexible and the harder I've tried to bend my beliefs to fit the data that I've seen, the more I've converged to something that is closer to truth. But there's no way I'm there yet. So I certainly don't claim to have 100% certainty about almost anything. Maybe 99.9 about my existence, and maybe 99% certain that I'm actually conscious or some things like that. But there are quite a few things that I don't have a lot of certainty about, and quite a few things where I'm still 51-49% on two competing hypotheses. And I think that's the way it should be. I think the only honest way to model beliefs is to at least retain a little bit of openness to all possibilities, as long as there's some degree of plausibility. As the evidence mounts and as something becomes obviously true, though, it's also important to let the bulk of the weight of your hypotheses, or bulk of the weight of your beliefs, go to the hypothesis that is well supported. Because it's not okay to choose what we believe. Sometimes people say, oh, beliefs are a choice. You choose what you believe. While that's technically true, I think there's only one choice in belief, and that's whether to be honest or not to be honest. And that's not much of a choice at all. The only right choice to make there is to be honest. We should be honest, and I think being honest involves letting the weight that you throw behind each of your beliefs match the weight that should be thrown behind them, and that weight should be based on the evidence that you see. It's not something where you get to say, oh, well, this belief would cause me to behave in that way. Therefore, I'm going to go with this belief which yields the best behavior, because you can behave the way you choose regardless of what your beliefs are. And so I think that beliefs should be molded to fit the evidence, and choices should be molded to fit values and priorities and what's moral, what's right, and what's wrong. And I think that it's immoral when people choose their beliefs trying to massage their actions. Like, if I believe that, then I would go be bad. You can be good or you can be bad if you choose to be. That doesn't mean you get to choose what's true, what's factually accurate. No matter how long I mentally strain myself, I cannot change the way the universe is. It is what it is. And so part of being intellectually honest is acknowledging that it is the way that it is, and still trying to make good choices, still trying to do what's right, irrespective of what actually turns out to be factually correct. So what is real? I'm pretty sure I'm real because I'm here having this experience right now. And I can't say I know for sure that you're real or that you're even there, because you might be a illusion or a hologram or a bunch of information just cleverly being fed into my brain somehow. Plato argued that reality, therefore, is all abstract. It's in your mind. It's an ideal. I personally, however, find this to be somewhat of an egocentric perspective on life, to suggest that only our own individual experiences matter because that's all we can verify for sure. It seems to me that even though I don't know you're real, I can still achieve a reasonable level of confidence. I'm pretty sure we actually are right here having this conversation. I'm pretty sure you are listening to the words that I'm saying. And so I think I can reasonably conclude that there is a common, there are universals, there's a common reality that we share. And I think that reality is much better described as the material universe in which we live and cooperate and interact than it is as a concept or an idea or an ideal. So I relate much better to Aristotelian realism than to Platonic idealism. I think that really strikes at the core of what it means to be a human. If you think about it, humans are very social creatures. We don't like to be alone. If you put a human in solitary confinement, that's a form of torture. Nobody's happy about that, because interacting is what we do. It's been noted that if you take an animal and you put it in the desert or someplace like that, it wanders around and forages for food. And if you take a lone human and you put them in the wilderness, they do the same thing. They behave in approximately the same way. But what makes humans unique and different is what happens when you put them in groups. Whereas a group of animals will still wander around and forage for food and try to serve themselves. Humans will get organized. They'll start creating a greater organism. They'll start forming a cohesive structure. They'll say, you build a defensive perimeter, you go over there and forage for food, and you take care of the children, and the society starts to work as a whole. I just can't believe that type of a system would form unless there was a common reality, unless we did actually interact with each other, unless there was something more than our own personal experiences. So because I lean towards altruism rather than egocentrism, I think it makes a lot more sense to perceive truth and reality as the things we actually can measure, the way it seems to be, and the way that we are able to interact and cooperate with each other. Well, if reality were created, that would imply that the universe is sort of a simulation of sorts. And I can see why that's a compelling thought. If the universe is simulated, then whoever is operating that simulation, the creator, would be a de facto god. That is, suppose he didn't like something we were doing. Well, he just hit pause on the simulation, changed some things around, and then go again. There's nothing we could do about that. If he didn't like a direction that we were heading in, he could restore from a backup copy and then make us do it again. We could never discover him if he didn't want to be discovered, because as soon as we discovered him, he would just restore from backup and make it so that we didn't. So if we use the word natural to refer to everything that's inside this simulated universe, and supernatural to mean everything that's in the more real universe in which this simulation is residing, then the question really becomes, is there any reason to believe in the supernatural? If there is supernatural, that sort of suggests that the universe is a simulation of sorts. And if there's no supernatural, that means this is the base reality. There's nothing more fundamental than this reality in which we're all being simulated. So one argument that the universe is probably simulated just relies on counting the total number of simulations. If we think of every video game as creating a sort of reality, then there are a whole lot of simulated realities out there, and there's at most only the one base reality. And so I can see why it seems a little bit egocentric to suggest that, hey, ours is the real reality, the base reality in which all other simulations rely. So maybe the universe is simulated, and I can't prove that it's not. But when I look at it objectively, I don't think our universe exhibits the properties that one would expect in a simulated universe. For example, when we build simulations, we try to be computationally efficient. And if you look at, say, planet Jupiter, it has weather just like we have down here on Earth. And weather is known to be very chaotic. You can't just forecast it very easily. You have to actually simulate it at a very low level to get any accurate model of the weather. Now, Jupiter has far more complex and more chaotic weather than we even have here on Earth. And it's much bigger and much more complicated. So if this universe is simulated, then the simulator is doing a whole lot of computation just to maintain the weather on Jupiter that absolutely nobody is looking at, until finally NASA sends this Juno probe off to go check out the weather on Jupiter. And it looks like that weather's been going on for a very long time. Now, I don't know that it has, because we don't have a long history of monitoring weather patterns on Jupiter. But it just doesn't seem like the kind of thing that anyone would waste their time simulating. And that's not the only planet out there. There are a whole lot of uninhabited planets. So it seems pretty unlikely to me that all of this is the result of some deliberate simulation. It seems far more likely that, in fact, this might be the base reality. Now, I could be wrong. Again, I don't know that this is the base reality, but it seems that it's still reasonable to assume that it is. If there is somebody out there who is overseeing this simulation and is testing us to see if we'll see through his ruse, I can't really imagine that he would be all that upset if we accepted things at face value. You know, it makes sense to me that he would maybe even prefer that we did that we would operate within the realm in which we were placed. If it is some kind of a ruse and we're supposed to see through it, that just doesn't sound like a very benevolent thing to me. I think it makes more sense to work with the environment in which we've got and take it all at face value. So do I believe there are space aliens? Yes, I think there probably are. I mean, if we look at the history of the Earth, life formed relatively early. It was almost immediately after the crust of the Earth cooled that we find the evidence of the first life that seems to have emerged on the Earth. So based on that, it looks very probable that that life occurring is not a rare or unlikely event, but rather something that probably happens when the conditions are right. Now, given the size of the galaxy and the number of planets that we now know are out there, I think it's pretty likely that the conditions are right in at least a few places. So I think it's almost inevitable that there probably is intelligent, even, life out there. Now, that, of course, brings the inevitable question, so where are they? Why haven't we seen them yet? I think more is made of this question than it really deserves, because we also know that it's difficult to get off of your planet. I mean, we've been to the moon. We've not even been to our nearest planetary neighbor yet. And it's actually hard to get out of your gravity well. And space is darn big. Now, I know we've done a lot of spectral analysis of the atmospheric content of distant stars, that's not really the same as looking for life. I don't think we can even confidently say that there isn't life on the planet surrounding the nearest star to us. We can't even confidently say there isn't life on some of the moons of other planets in our solar system. So I don't think that it's very easy to find alien life, and I think that's a good enough explanation. I don't see a strong need to seek for a better one when that's enough to explain it. There are, of course, other possible explanations for why there isn't intelligent life that's come to visit us yet, but due to the vacuum of need for another explanation, I think we should just go with the one that we've got, which is, hey, space is big and it's darn hard to find other intelligent life. But I think we'll find it. Given enough time, given enough energy, I believe that we'll probably send out probes and eventually we'll stumble across one. And certainly that encounter will be awkward, just like the first social encounter of a teenager dancing with a member of the opposite sex for the first time. Of course it's awkward, and of course, yeah, it's a big deal, but it leads to a life-changing event. And I bet you finding intelligent life out there in the solar system will be that kind of experience where it changes all kinds of things, and maybe it changes the directions we head in. But I think that'll be fun, and I'm excited for it. I think we should continue to search for extraterrestrial intelligent life, because I bet you it's probably there. Don't know it, but if it is, it's certainly worth at least giving it a go. So Jesus said, "By their fruits ye shall know them." Now, in matters of priorities, values, and matters of right and wrong, I think it's very clear that religion is producing the fruits. I think science even very deliberately refrains from telling people what their priorities ought to be, what they should value, or what they should do this or should do that. And so there's very much a separation in which religion tells people what's important, what to value, what's moral and what's immoral, and science is telling people what's true, what's factually accurate, what to believe and what not to believe. By contrast, when it comes to determining what is true, what's right and what's wrong, I think all of the fruit is very clearly in the realm of science. For example, science has told us where we came from in a way that has turned out to be far more verifiable than what religion has claimed. Science has told us how to cure diseases, whereas religions claim to cure people with faith. Science eradicates entire diseases, and when they find an effective way of treating some condition, it is published for the benefit of everyone, whether they have faith or not, whether they like science or whether they hate it. Science has very much carried us from the Dark Ages to modern civilization, to advanced technology, to the transportation that we have, the ability to communicate globally. Everything that we have that has improved human lives because of truth has come from science. And so, in many ways, I feel that science has all of the fruit as far as determining what is true, and therefore we ought to give our faith to science when it comes to knowing what is factually accurate versus factually inaccurate. And religion is probably still deserving of our trust when it comes to determining right from wrong, what to prioritize, and what to value. But I wouldn't trust religion further than I can verify it to tell us what is factually accurate or what is true, because frankly, it doesn't have a very good track record of doing that. The question is, how can science even say anything about supernatural phenomena when science only measures natural things, when science only uses empirical methods? Well, it's true that science only measures natural phenomena. Science only measures material things that it can measure. And so, yes, science has no way of reaching into the supernatural realm. But there's also this principle in Bayesian statistics called explaining away. And it works like this. If you wake up in the morning and the grass is wet, what happened? Well, obviously it rained, right? You have an explanation, you're good. But suppose that as you're going throughout your day, you think to yourself, wait a minute, there's another explanation. Maybe the sprinklers were misconfigured to come on in the middle of the night. And so you start to question, well, did it rain last night? I don't know. Suppose you check your sprinkler system, and as you expected, in fact, it was misconfigured, and it was set to go off at 3 in the morning. Well, all of a sudden now, this explanation is starting to make a whole lot of sense. And even though you have not measured the rain in any way, you don't know whether it rained last night. You have a new explanation, and the new explanation has become increasingly plausible. And simply by providing a new, better explanation, the old one starts to lose its traction. It becomes less probable. And in fact, you can quantify that. You can put a number on how much it becomes less probable if you have probabilities to go with the new information. So that's the method by which science actually can refute some of these supernatural explanations, simply by finding natural explanations that explain many of the phenomena that we have been using as basis for believing in these supernatural stories. Science has started to unravel a lot of these supernatural explanations, and it's started to show that, hey, some of our natural understanding of the universe is actually quite reliable and quite verifiably correct. And the more that happens, the less reason we have to even suppose that these supernatural explanations have any basis in reality. And the trend really strongly seems to suggest that these stories were probably made up and didn't have any reason to be claimed in the first place. And the strongest evidence we have for that is that we have these other explanations which are natural and which science can reach and validate and verify and test and measure and work with. And because of that, science is very good at suggesting that there probably is no God, there probably is no supernatural realm, there probably is nothing outside of the natural universe, because there's no reason to suppose that there is. Now, it's always possible that people were serendipitously right. Like maybe they made up God, but he also happened to be there. While that's a possibility, probability tells us that it's extremely unlikely. Usually things that you claim are not true unless you have some reason to know that they're true. And so that's why the scientific method ends up being so important in determining what really is true, because only the things that we actually have evidence for usually seem to turn out to actually be true when it comes down to utilizing them. So far, I don't think there has ever been a supernatural explanation that has superseded any natural explanation for something. If there is, I'm not aware of it. So a very common argument is that because life is very, very complex, there must have been an intelligent designer. I find, however, that that's not really consistent with my experience. As when I engineer things, I can maybe optimize 3, 4, maybe 5 variables simultaneously, and very quickly I get overwhelmed. There's more complexity than I can manage with my limited intelligence. Now, of course, if an intelligent designer were much, much more intelligent than I, they could handle more variables than I could. But when I find that I have a large optimization task to perform, I turn to optimization techniques. And one of the most effective nonlinear optimization methods we have is a genetic algorithm. It works basically by simulating evolution. So we make this very large population and we mutate it and we perform natural selection until we find a sequence that's near optimal. And genetic algorithms are able to simultaneously optimize thousands or hundreds of thousands of variables. And they're far more capable than even an intelligent engineer, because they use these large populations that can explore all kinds of paths systematically in ways that the engineer can't explore himself. So if there is an intelligent designer, I think it's very clear that he would be aware of the right tools for the job. And so either way, I think the answer very clearly shows that evolution is a more likely candidate than somebody sitting around and thinking about how to design life. So the question is, if evolution is real, then where are all the intermediate fossils? Well, as I have simulated evolution, I've found that it doesn't tend to progress in a continuous, steady manner. What tends to happen is it progresses in starts and spurts. When only one mutation is needed for an organism to advance, that tends to happen relatively quickly on the evolutionary scale. But if you have multiple mutations that need to all simultaneously occur to make some combinatoric advance, well, then it's going to probably take a much longer duration of time before the right combination is discovered. So I think evolution tends to progress for a while and then stop and then stall for a very long time and then progress again. As soon as it makes the right combinatorial discovery, then it surges forward and progresses really rapidly. And the result is you end up with an overabundance of fossils of some types that were very stable for long periods of time, and almost a complete lack of fossils in some areas when, at least on the evolutionary scale, things were advancing rather quickly. Also, it should be noted that most creatures don't actually turn into fossils. For example, when something dies, it's probably going to decompose or be eaten. Some very highly specific conditions are necessary for fossils to even form. So when we say, hey, why are there missing links in the evolutionary record? Well, to some extent, it's not that there are missing links. There's actually quite an abundance of continuity in most areas. Of course, there are some areas where we wish we had more fossils, but the fact that there are intermediate fossils suggests that we know at least some of them pass through these intermediate stages. So I don't think it's at all inconsistent with the theory of evolution that there are not an abundance of fossils for intermediate species. I think there's just about the number that we would expect, and so I think that the theory has been very well validated by the evidence we've discovered. Oh, well, science doesn't know the answer, so I'm certainly not going to say I know the answer. I absolutely don't know. But I'll speculate, just for fun. So, if we consider what we know about life, everything we know that is alive has several properties. For example, life tends to do the Krebs cycle or photosynthesis or have some chemical cycle by which it consumes energy and produces work and can get things done. Everything we know that's alive has cellular encapsulation and reproduces and uses DNA in order to accomplish this. And there are all these properties that we have identified for life. Now, if we take the simplest life form that we've ever discovered, it's still so complex that there's no way it could have just spontaneously happened. And so this has been a great mystery for science and for everyone. But I think that we're looking a little beyond the mark because, see, nature doesn't care how we define life. It doesn't care what we think is necessary for life. It doesn't even care what life is. Let's look instead at the requirements for evolution. In order for something to evolve, you don't need cell walls or DNA or the Krebs cycle or any of this complex stuff that seems to occur in life. All you really need is something that reproduces, and there needs to be diversity in the population and some pressure to filter out the bad ones, some selection mechanism. That's all you need for evolution. Now, look at things that spontaneously form that reproduce. Fire, for example. Very simple, spontaneously happens in the natural world. And if you were to light a tree on fire, for example, pretty soon a whole bunch of trees would be on fire because the fire tends to spread. Now, you might say, well, that's not alive. And that's right, it's not alive. Fire doesn't have cellular encapsulation, it doesn't have DNA, it doesn't have all these things that are necessary for life. But it does exhibit a lot of interesting properties. It does generate heat. It does produce waste. It does consume fuel, and when the fuel runs out, it dies. It has a lot of the things that life has. And most significantly, it seems to meet a lot of the properties necessary for evolution. So my hypothesis is that some chemical reaction started, and I don't know how and I don't know where, but I'm going to guess that somehow it produced just enough that diversity could form, that there was a population, and that the better ones survived. And if that happens, that's really all you need. And then slowly things like cellular walls and DNA and the Krebs cycle and photosynthesis and all these other complex processes could have come along later. Maybe slowly, maybe quickly, I don't know. And I certainly don't know how it could have happened, but I bet you it did. There's a very long history of people pointing to different properties of life and saying, aha, that is irreducibly complex. There's no way that could have just happened because which formed first, the heart or the veins? And it's kind of a hard question, but if you look at the fossil record, it turns out there's an answer. Or which came first, wings or feathers and flapping and flying? And they can actually answer this question because there are enough living and dead fossils around to show us how wings and hearts and eyeballs evolved. So it seems likely to me that even though we haven't found the evidence to suggest how the very fundamental properties of life evolved, I bet you somehow evolution could find these ways of reducing the complexity, or rather building up the complexity, going in the reverse direction. I bet you there's a way, even though we supposedly intelligent humans can't find it. I think evolution tends to be a lot smarter, or at least a lot more effective at optimizing than intelligent designers. So who detonated the Big Bang? I have absolutely no idea. I don't know what causes a Big Bang. Here's what I know. Solar fusion occurs by natural processes in the sun. It happens when the sun gets massive enough, there's enough pressure in the center that it fuses hydrogen atoms together and they form helium, and that makes the center of the sun really, really hot, and that warms up the whole sun, and it's so hot that the plasma emits a bunch of light. I know that we also can witness all around us there are supernovae, and supernovae also occur by natural processes. So it seems plausible to me that maybe the Big Bang also occurs by natural processes. I don't think we yet have a plausible reason to suppose it was detonated by a supernatural mechanism, but I won't say that it wasn't. I don't know. I also don't think that I necessarily accept the idea that space and time began with the Big Bang. I understand that certain prominent scientific celebrities have suggested that is the case. But the more I've studied it, the more I've found a lot of physicists don't believe that space or time or matter or energy all came into existence with the Big Bang. And I kind of like the idea that space actually is infinite, and therefore it would follow that time probably is as well. And if that's the case, then the Big Bang might have actually not had anything to do with the birth of the universe. It's really just the birth of anything that we still have evidence about. I don't think we really know what the Big Bang is or why it happened. I suspect, simply based on the other things we've observed, that it's a natural thing. And maybe Big Bangs occur every several billion years. Maybe Big Bangs occur all over the place. Maybe they don't. I really don't know. Doesn't the second law of thermodynamics prove that the universe started at the Big Bang? No, I don't think it does prove that the universe started with the Big Bang. So the second law of thermodynamics suggests that entropy, or states that entropy can only monotonically increase in a closed system. Now, the universe is surely a closed system because we know of no way to get anything in or out of the universe. As far as we know, there's no reachable supernatural realm. Therefore, as if entropy is monotonically increasing and the universe has been around forever, then wouldn't we expect entropy to be out of control and the whole universe into chaos? That's an argument, and it's a reasonable argument, that maybe the universe started with the Big Bang. But I don't think that it's a good one, and here's why. First of all, at the Big Bang, supposedly everything we know about was compressed at a very dense single particle. Well, the second law of thermodynamics only applies to multiple particle systems. That is, it's a statistical law. It's not that it enforces anything, and in fact, entropy has been observed to decrease in systems with very few particles. It's just that in a system with lots of particles, it's very unlikely, it's statistically unlikely for entropy to not monotonically increase. And so because of that, because it's so utterly improbable, we have the second law of thermodynamics. But if the Big Bang actually did involve everything at a single point, there was only one particle, so entropy is not even a concept at that point, and the second law of thermodynamics completely doesn't apply. So there's one mechanism by which the entropy of the universe could have been reset. Another is that the second law of thermodynamics is not a causal law, it's an observable law. That is, it's only something that exists because of the statistical improbability of it not being correct. Yet, if we look at, say, the continuity of space, it certainly looks like space continues forever. And thus it follows that time probably continues in both directions forever. Now, we don't know that that's true, but we have observations that strongly suggest it. Is there any reason to suggest that the second law of thermodynamics is more importantly true than the continuity of space? And I think that the continuity of space is so consistently measurable and so consistently observably true, at least as far as we can see, that it takes quite a stretch to suggest that there is an end. And what's beyond the end? Is there a brick wall there, or is the universe toroidal, or what happens when you reach the end of the universe? I have no idea what that concept even means. So I can't really imagine there being an end to space or time, but I could imagine the second law of thermodynamics breaking down as it's only an observed thing, not something that actually forces the universe to behave in a specific way. So I'm not ready to say that this particular law trumps the other things that we know. I think that we know the universe is infinite just as well as we know the second law of thermodynamics is true. Now these two concepts contradict each other. Which one's right? Well, the only answer I'm comfortable with is I don't know. And I sure hope we find some evidence to solve this, but we certainly can't draw certain conclusions. We certainly can't say, we know that time began with the Big Bang, because we don't know that. Do I believe in free will? Well, that depends on how you define free will. See, there are at least two different concepts that are called free will, and I have different beliefs about them, so let's clarify. At least one of the common definitions is the capability to make non-deterministic choices. And for the second one, let's say it's the culpability for the consequences of those choices. Those are two very different concepts. Do I think that humans are capable of making non-deterministic choices? Not really, no. I'm more of a determinist. I do, however, believe in chaos. That is, I think there's enough complexity in this universe that in order to anticipate that complexity would require more computational power, as much computational power as the universe itself. And similarly, I think humans are also chaotic. So no, I don't think that their choices can necessarily be foreseen. But I do think that our choices are a consequence of everything that is us. And everything that is us includes all of our learning and the things that our past experiences and a lot of things that we don't always think of as being us. But I do think that the universe itself, or that physics itself, operates in a deterministic manner. Now, when we talk about culpability for consequences, though, that's a very different thing. Sometimes people get all nihilistic about determinism. They say, well, if we're determined, then we're not responsible for anything we do because we had to, because determinism. And I think that's a really dumb attitude, because if there's determinism, then consequences deterministically follow from the choices that you make, so therefore it's all the more culpable all the more responsibility you have to make good choices, because, hey, determinism, you should have foreseen those consequences. Well, in my opinion, the whole idea of responsibility is almost more of a social construct. It's when we assign blame, we do that for a good reason, and that's because, hey, we don't like this bad thing, we want to fix it, and so we need to figure out who's responsible. The right way to assign blame is to do it proportional to the effect on the consequences, and that's often very difficult to determine. What I think has largely happened, and this is unfortunate, is that free will has been invented as an excuse for pinning 100% of the blame on one person, saying, you committed a crime, you're a sinner, you're going to hell, and I wash my hands of you, I don't have any responsibility whatsoever. But in reality, nothing is that simple. There is chaos in this universe, and when children make bad choices, of course that child bears most of the responsibility, but there is a degree of, hey, that person's parents maybe should have worked a little harder, or maybe their teachers should have done more, or maybe society shouldn't have been so cruel to them. And in fact, I think it would be best if everybody bore a degree, maybe even a sliver, of responsibility for everything that goes wrong. And the person who's most culpable should probably be the person who most directly was involved in making the choice. So in that sense, yes, I believe there is free will. There is responsibility to make good choices, and even more so because of determinism. But I think it's a silly objective to try to pursue making unforeseeable choices. Then why am I an altruist? What's my basis for morality? The basis for my morality is my belief that I am part of a family, and that my family is part of human society, and that the things I do impact this larger, more important life than myself, if that makes sense. I like to draw an analogy with the cells in my body. If they start serving only themselves and neglect their role in sustaining the greater life of my body, well, that's bad. That's negative. We call these cells cancer. And I don't want to be a cancer because I don't think that it's all about me. I don't like this egocentric view of the world. I think that by being aware of the fact that I am part of a larger organism, it becomes very clear to me that I should do the things that are good for others, that I should try to be a good citizen, a good member of society. I should try to do my job well. As Shakespeare put it, whate'er thou art, act well thy part. I really like that saying. If I were to live an egocentric life, then death would take away everything that matters to me. And that would be so sad. I think that that may be a significant force in causing egocentric people to insist that there must be an afterlife. I must be immortal. I must live forever. But I don't think that's necessary for morality. I think that simply not living for yourself is a very good and important way to see that there is purpose in life, and some of that purpose is doing things that are going to persist beyond your own life. So I find a lot of meaning in trying to serve others. As a scientist, I try to make discoveries that will advance human knowledge, and that's important to me. So simply because it's meaningful to me, you can't really say that that's not meaningful. It's meaningful to me, if not to you. And so when I try to make discoveries, when I try to do things that I feel are important, I feel satisfaction, I get peace, and I find a lot of joy in trying to be moral, trying to be a good citizen, and trying to help out this organism that I feel I'm a part of. It's not just an organism that's around me, it's an organism that is me. I'm more than just an individual. I'm also a member of a family and of society and a scientist and a lot of other things. Is society really alive? Yeah. I think that society is maybe even more alive than I am. See, I think of life as a spectrum, not a binary, you're either alive or you're not alive type thing. And in many ways, I think society probably has more life than even I as a human being have. Let's consider as an example some of the things that make me alive. In my body, I have a circulatory system, a cardiovascular, my heart pumps blood through all the veins to carry nutrients throughout my body. But look at human society. We have a whole economy, and there's interstate highways and trade routes to carry nutrients all over the world. And in many ways, the circulatory system of the world is more advanced than the one in my body because FedEx will deliver a package right to my doorstep. My body has a digestive and respiratory system that helps me digest energy or digest food and produce energy so I can operate. Well, society has the whole power grid. We mine for fossil fuels, and we burn them, and we deliver energy through all the houses. And in many ways, the power grid is more advanced in society even than the digestive system in my body. I think that's self-evident just by the way we have smart grids, and we can send power to very specific locations where it's needed, and we monitor precisely how much energy is consumed. That doesn't happen in my body. My body has an endocrine system. That's where my brain generates these hormones that kind of direct how my body operates at a high level. Whereas society has a whole legislative branch of government, which if you were to compare the number of laws out there that direct society and the economy, it really is probably more complex even than the hormones that tell my body how to behave. My body has a nervous system composed of my brain and the nerves that carry messages all throughout my body. But society's built the internet. And if you think about it, the internet does packet switching. It sends a single message from computer to computer all the way to its targeted destination. That's more advanced even than my nervous system, which has a dedicated hard wire going to every part of my body. The society makes much better use of its nervous system even than I think the human body does. My body has an immune system, keeps out bad things, whereas society has a police force and border control and national defense and things like that. Let's see, I have a reproductive system, right? Every human wants to find a partner and be with somebody and reproduce and make redundant copies of yourself. Well, society doesn't really do that yet, but we're trying really hard. We've got this space program and we're peering through space looking for somebody else to relate with. And we really want to make redundant copies of ourselves just in case this planet gets struck by a great big meteor. And it seems like everything that life does, every aspect of a human body is not only produced in human society, but it's done even better, even to a more precise level, to a more accurate extent. If you consider all the thoughts that pass through my mind, I can think of maybe 2 things at a time, sometimes. But what's going through the mind of society? Or what is society even thinking of right now? Well, there's probably 50 million cat videos playing on YouTube at this very moment. And yeah, the whole of society is pretty obsessed with cute cats, apparently. But there's also scientific papers circulating around and files of every sort. And the world is thinking about more things than I can even hold in my brain. And it does that every single second. I think that society is not just alive. I think it's very, very alive. More alive than I am. I think its thoughts are deeper than mine. I think society is doing everything that could possibly be considered to be alive. So yeah, I think it's very, very much alive. So how do you know what is true? Well,